I learned the sound of silence the hard way. Not the peaceful kind that settles over a house at night, but the hollow kind that rattles in the ribs when a man leaves with promises and months stretch into seasons. The kind that teaches you where the floor creaks, how the refrigerator hums louder when you are alone, how a marriage can echo even after the footsteps are gone. Click the subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. My husband left in early spring. He stood at the front door with his travel bag slung over one shoulder, smelling of cologne he only wore when he wanted to feel important. He kissed my cheek, not my mouth, and said the job would take time. Ill fields, contracts, opportunities. He spoke in those broad, confident words men use when they want you to stop asking questions. 3 months, he said. He nodded. Wives are trained to nod. 3 months became 5. 5 became 7. Calls came less often. His voice grew unfamiliar, like a radio station drifting out of range. When I asked when he was coming home, he laughed softly, the way people do when they're already elsewhere. Soon, he said. Be patient. Patience is a virtue, they say. No one tells you it can also be a punishment. I was 38 years old and living in a house that still smelled like him. His boots by the door. His jackets hanging in the closet. His half-finished projects mocking me from the garage. I dusted around his absence, cooked for one, slept on my side of the bed like the other side might accuse me of betrayal if I touched it. The neighbors watched. They always do. In a small western town, loneliness is not private. Mrs. Calder from across the street waved too eagerly when she saw me collecting mail. The cashier at the grocery store asked, for the 4th time, if my husband was still away on business. I smiled and said yes, because truth is a heavy thing to carry through a checkout line. At night, I sat at the kitchen table and reread old texts, old notes, old versions of myself. I remembered the man I married. Or maybe I remembered the man I believed he was. Somewhere around the 8th month, something in me went quiet. Not broken. Not angry. Just quiet. I stopped waiting. Began with small decisions. I repainted the guest room without asking his opinion. I sold his old motorcycle to a collector 2 towns over. I took my name off the joint credit card and opened an account in my own name. Each act felt like stepping onto solid ground after months of walking on sand. Then one afternoon, while sorting through a stack of unpaid bills and unanswered questions, I looked around the house and realized something with startling clarity. This place was not holding me anymore. I was holding it. The house sat on a generous lot near the edge of town, white siding faded by sun and wind, porch railing chipped from years of weather and neglect. We bought it early in our marriage, proud and hopeful, convinced it was the beginning of something permanent. But permanence is a story people tell themselves. I called a realtor the next day. Her name was Linda, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair and a voice that carried authority without apology. She walked through the house with a clipboard, nodding, making notes, opening windows. "You're sure about this?" she asked. I looked around the living room. The couch where we once argued about children we never had. The corner where his favorite chair sat empty now, like a monument to absence. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. We listed the house quietly. No sign out front. No gossip fed to the neighbors. Within weeks, an offer came in from a young couple moving in from out of state. Clean. Quick. I signed the papers alone. When the sale closed, I sat in my car in the parking lot of the title office and cried. Not because I was sad, but because something old and heavy finally slid off my shoulders. I felt lighter than I had in years. I moved into a small rental on the west side of town, closer to the hills, with creaky floors and a view of open sky. I brought only what I needed. Photographs that didn't hurt to look at. I didn't tell my husband. Part of me wanted to hear his confusion, his anger, his sudden interest in decisions he'd abandoned months ago. But another part of me knew something important. This was not about him anymore. The call came on a Tuesday morning. His name flashed on my phone, unexpected and intrusive, like a knock on the door you didn't invite. "I'm coming home," he said, voice bright, almost celebratory. "When?" Yes. Today. I'm already on the road. I said nothing. There was a pause on the line. You there? I'm here, I said. Drive safe. He hung up without another word. I spent the rest of the day calm in a way that surprised me. Cleaned my rental. Midi. Watched the sun slide across the wooden floor. Somewhere in town, a house that used to be mine waited for people who believed in beginnings. Late afternoon, my phone rang again. I'm outside, he said. Outside where? Yes. Our house. Closed my eyes. There it was. The moment. The reckoning I hadn't chased, but also hadn't avoided. That's not our house anymore, I said. Silence. Thick and stunned. What do you mean? He asked. I mean you're standing in front of someone else's front door. His voice sharpened. What are you talking about? I sold it. The words landed like dropped glass. You did what? He shouted. I sold the house, I repeated steady. Months ago. You had no right, he said. That was my house too. You stopped living in it, I said. You stopped being part of it. He was breathing hard now. I could picture him, hand on his hip, jaw clenched, trying to rearrange a reality that refused to cooperate. I'm not alone, he said suddenly. Waited. There's someone with me, he continued. A woman. Still I waited. She's pregnant. There it was. The truth he'd rehearsed, probably imagined delivering in 100 different ways. Maybe he thought it would break me. Maybe he hoped it would. I felt nothing like he expected. I know, I said. You know. His voice wavered. How could you know? Because men who leave for months don't come back empty-handed, I said. Because silence tells stories if you listen long enough. Another pause. Then softer, almost defensive. It wasn't planned. It never is, I said. She's here with me, he added, as if that changed something. Then you should find somewhere to stay, I said. Because I don't live there anymore. You expect me to just, what? Figure it out, he demanded. Yes, I said. That's what I did. The line went dead. I stood by the window of my rental, looking out at the wide, indifferent sky. Somewhere across town, my husband stood with his pregnant mistress in front of a house that no longer belonged to him, learning what it felt like to arrive too late. For the first time since he left, I smiled. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. This was only the beginning. I did not sleep that night. Not because I was afraid or heartbroken, or pacing the floor waiting for another call. I stayed awake because my mind was finally doing something it hadn't done in a long time. It was catching up. Morning came in pale and quiet. I brewed coffee and drank it slowly, standing by the kitchen window of my rental, watching a pair of birds argue over a wire fence. Life, apparently, did not pause for emotional revelations. That fact felt oddly comforting. My phone buzzed just after 8. Text. We need to talk. In person. I stared at the screen. Months ago, those words would have sent my pulse racing, my thoughts scrambling to please, to fix, to hold together something already cracked. Now they landed with all the urgency of a weather update. Where? Type back. The diner on Main. In. I agreed, not because I owed him anything, but because loose ends have a way of tugging when you leave them unattended. The diner smelled like grease and old coffee, like it always had. The same cracked vinyl booths. The same waitress who'd been calling everyone Han since before I got married. I chose a table near the window. He arrived 10 minutes late. That alone told me more than his message ever could. He walked in stiffly, scanning the room, then spotted me. For a moment, he hesitated, like he wasn't sure he was allowed to approach. I noticed how different he looked. Thinner. Tired. Older, in a way that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with consequences. And then I saw her. She stayed near the door at first, one hand resting on her belly in a gesture that felt both protective and performative. She was younger than me. Early 20s, maybe. Long hair pulled back too tightly. Eyes darting around the room like she expected judgment to leap from every corner. Eyes met. I did not look away. He gestured for her to come over, and she followed him to the table, moving carefully, as if the floor might give out beneath her. "This is," he began. "I know who she is," I said. He stopped mid-sentence. The waitress appeared with menus, cheerful and oblivious. I ordered coffee. Black. He ordered nothing. The young woman asked for water in a voice barely above a whisper. For a moment we sat there, three people bound together by a story that had already decided how it would end. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said finally, leaning forward. "Sell the house." "I didn't think you'd actually bring her here," I replied. "She had nowhere else to go," he said quickly. "Her family kicked her out." "That's unfortunate," I said. "But it's not my emergency." The girl flinched as if I'd slapped her. I turned to her then, really looked at her. She was scared. That much was obvious. Scared and clinging to the only lifeline she thought she had. "How far along are you?" I asked. She glanced at him, then back at me. 5 months. He nodded. "You should be seeing a doctor regularly." She nodded too, relieved by the normalcy of the question. "Why are you being like this?" my husband snapped. "So calm. Like none of this matters." I met his eyes. "It matters. Just not in the way you want." He scoffed. "You're punishing me." "I'm protecting myself," I said. "There's a difference." He leaned back in his seat, frustration written all over his face. "You had no right to sell without telling me." "I had every legal right," I said. "Your name was on the mortgage. Mine was on the deed. You should have read the paperwork you signed instead of rushing out the door." That shut him up. The waitress returned with coffee and water. She set the mug in front of me and gave my husband a curious look. Small towns thrive on these moments. "I need somewhere to stay," he said after she walked away. "Just until I get things sorted." "No," I said simply. "You can't just leave us homeless." "I didn't," I said. "You did that when you chose to build a life elsewhere." He turned to the young woman, his voice softening. "Tell her." She swallowed hard. "Please," she said to me. "I didn't know he was married when we met." Not at first. I believed her. Or at least I believed she wanted me to. "I'm not angry at you," I said. "But I'm not responsible for you either." Tears welled in her eyes. I thought when he said he had a wife, that things were already over. I looked at my husband then. Really looked. "Were they?" asked him. He said nothing. Silence stretched between us, heavy and exposing. "I'm not your enemy," I continued. "But I am no longer your safety net." He clenched his jaw. "So that's it. You just walk away with everything." "I walked away with what I earned," I said. "Peace. Stability. My future." I stood reaching for my purse. "We're not done talking," he said sharply. "We are," I replied. Anything left to say should have been said months ago. I looked at the young woman one last time. "I hope you find your footing. For your sake and that baby's." Then I walked out. The bell over the diner door rang softly as it closed behind me. Outside, the sun was high, the street alive with people going about their ordinary lives. I took a deep breath and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Relief. Behind me, in that booth by the window, my past sat with its consequences, finally understanding that I was no longer part of the equation. And for the first time in a long while, the road ahead felt wide open. I did not expect him to show up at my rental. That was my mistake. I had underestimated the kind of man who believes loss is temporary if he argues hard enough. The kind who confuses entitlement with persistence. The kind who thinks history is a claim he can still collect on. It was just after dusk when I heard the knock. Not polite. Not hesitant. A sharp, demanding sound, like authority rapping its knuckles against wood. I knew it was him before I opened the door. He stood there with his jaw set and his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. No suitcase this time. No woman in tow. Just him, stripped of the performance he'd brought to the diner. "You didn't tell me where you moved," he said. "I didn't intend to," I replied. He glanced past me into the small living room. The sparse furniture. The boxes stacked neatly against one wall. The absence of him everywhere. "This is where you live now?" he asked, disbelief heavy in his voice. "For now," I said. "What do you want?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We need to talk privately." "We already did." "No," he said. "We talked publicly." That was different. I crossed my arms. "This isn't happening. I just need 5 minutes," he said. "Please." There it was. The word he rarely used. Not because he couldn't, but because he never thought he had to. I opened the door wider and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like a trespasser who hadn't realized the locks had changed. He stood in the center of the room, turning in a slow circle. "You really did it," he said. "You really left." "I didn't leave," I corrected. "I moved forward." He laughed, short and bitter. "You always had a way of turning things into speeches. And you always had a way of ignoring them," I said. He sat on the arm of the couch without asking. "I didn't plan for things to turn out this way." "I know," I said. "That's the problem." He rubbed his face with both hands. For a moment, he looked exhausted in a way that almost stirred something familiar. "Almost. She's scared," he said quietly. "She doesn't know anyone here. That's not my burden. She's carrying my child. That's your responsibility." He looked up at me then, eyes sharp. "What about our marriage?" "Our marriage ended the day you stopped coming home," I said. "It just took time for the paperwork to catch up." "We never signed anything," he said quickly. "You can't just decide it's over." "I can decide I'm done," I said. "The rest is procedure." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You're acting like I betrayed you on purpose." "You betrayed me regardless of intent," I replied. "Impact matters more than excuses." Silence settled again. "I thought you'd be angry," he admitted. "Screaming, crying, begging me to explain." "I did all my crying while you were gone," I said. "You just weren't here to see it." His throat moved as he swallowed. "You never told me you were struggling." "I did," I said. "You just didn't listen." He stood abruptly. "So that's it. I lose everything." "You didn't lose everything," I said. "You gave it away in pieces." He paced the room, restless. "The house, the life, the future we planned." "You stopped planning with me," I said. "You planned without me." He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked this time. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "I had to. You used to fight for us." "I fought alone," I said. "That gets tiring." He exhaled sharply. "I never thought you'd actually walk." "That's because you never thought I could," I replied. Another knock interrupted us. Not loud this time. Careful. Tentative. I opened the door to find the young woman standing there, arms wrapped around herself, eyes wide and apologetic. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "He said you might be willing to talk." I looked past her. Car idled at the curb. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "I know," she said. "But I needed to see you." He appeared behind me. "I told her where you were." I turned to him. "You had no right." "I was desperate," he said. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The evening air was cool, the sky streaked with pink and gray. I gestured toward the porch steps. "Sit." She did carefully. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said quickly. I need to understand." "Understand what?" "Yes. How you can let go so easily." I studied her face. A fear. A hope. The naive belief that survival depended on proximity to a man who had already proven unreliable. "It wasn't easy," I said. "It was necessary." She bit her lip. "He says you abandoned him." I almost laughed. "Of course he does. He says you took everything." "I took responsibility for myself," I said. "There's a difference." She hesitated. "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. No. But I won't save you either. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to do. I softened just a little. Then start by not building your life on someone else's ruins. Behind us, my husband stood watching, his control slipping with every word. This is unfair, he snapped. You're turning her against me. I'm telling the truth, I said. If that turns her against you, that's not my doing. He stepped forward. You owe me. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice steady but final. Not shelter. Not forgiveness. Not silence. The young woman stood slowly. We should go, she said, not meeting his eyes. He stared at me, something like panic creeping in. You're really done? Yes, I said. They walked away together, but the space between them was already visible. I went back inside and locked the door. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind move through the trees, I realized something important. He hadn't come to apologize. He'd come to reclaim. And for the first time, he understood that there was nothing left for him to take. The next morning I called a lawyer. Not out of spite. Not out of fear. Out of precision. Her office sat on the second floor of a brick building downtown, above a bookstore that smelled like dust and old paper. Her name was Margaret Ellis, and she did not smile unless there was a reason. I liked her immediately. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The months of absence, the mistress, the pregnancy, the house sale, the diner, the uninvited visit to my rental. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. You did the hardest part already, she said. What's that? I asked. You stopped negotiating with a ghost, she replied. She explained my position clearly, calmly, without judgment. The house sale was clean. The funds were mine. The marriage, legally speaking, still existed, but it was thin, brittle, one good push away from collapse. You're not obligated to support him, she said. Especially given abandonment and infidelity. He nodded. I don't want revenge. Good, she said. It's expensive and rarely satisfying. I want closure. She smiled then, just barely. That's more achievable. We began the paperwork. Petitions, statements, timelines, dates written in black ink that transformed memories into facts. Every signature felt like a door closing behind me, firm and final. When I left her office, I walked down Main Street slowly, aware of the weight shifting in my body. Not gone yet, but moving, like a storm drifting out to sea. I ran into Mrs. Calder outside the post office. Your husband's back in town, she said, eyes bright with interest. So I've heard, I replied. And the woman, she added. Poor thing. I met her gaze. Poor choices create hard lives. She blinked, clearly disappointed by the lack of spectacle. That afternoon the call came. I got served, he said. Yes, I replied. You really went through with it. I told you I would. His voice cracked. You didn't even warn me. I did, I said. Every time I asked you to come home. Silence. They're talking, he muttered. People. They're saying things. People always do, I said. They'll get bored. He exhaled hard. She's having complications. Closed my eyes. Not from guilt. From exhaustion. I hope she's getting medical care, I said. She is, he replied. But she's scared. I'm not the solution to that fear, I said gently. You used to care, he snapped. I still care, I said. Just not in ways that cost me myself. Another pause. I don't recognize you anymore, he said. That means I'm doing something right, I replied. He hung up. That evening, I sat on my porch watching the sky darken over the hills. I thought about the girl. About the child growing inside her. About how cycles repeat when no one chooses to stop them. I did not envy her. I did not resent her. I simply wished her clarity before it was too late. Days passed. The town adjusted as towns do. Whispers softened into murmurs. Murmurs into shrugs. New stories replaced old ones. I began to breathe differently. I slept through the night. I laughed unexpectedly. I noticed things. The way sunlight pooled on the floor in the mornings. The comfort of cooking without calculating someone else's preferences. The freedom of choosing silence. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. Not from him. From the bank. The funds from the house sale had finished transferring into my long-term account. The number stared back at me, solid and real. Security. Options. Future not tied to waiting. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. That night, as I turned off the lights, I realized something that startled me with its simplicity. For the first time in my adult life, nothing was chasing me. No expectations. No apologies owed. No versions of myself left behind to explain. To space. And in that space, something new began to take shape. I thought the legal papers would be the end of it. That once things were written down, stamped and filed, the past would finally understand it had lost its invitation. But the past is stubborn. It does not leave quietly. It circles back, testing doors it once opened without knocking. It happened on a Sunday. Church let out early that day. Bells echoing faintly across town as people spilled onto sidewalks with their polite smiles and careful curiosity. I had stayed home, curled up on the couch with a book, enjoying the rare luxury of an unclaimed afternoon. That was when my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I let it ring once. The third time I answered. "It's me," he said. Course it was. "What do you want?" "Yes." "I need to see you," he said. His voice sounded different. Thinner. Frayed at the edges. "No," I replied. "Please," he said. "This isn't about us. It's about the baby." Closed my eyes. There it was again. The hook. The appeal to a compassion he had mistaken for obligation. "I'm not involved," I said. "She left," he blurted out. That made me pause. "What do you mean?" "Yes." "She's gone," he said. "Packed her things last night. Took a bus. Left a note." I said nothing. "She said she couldn't trust me," he continued, voice rising with disbelief. "Said if I could abandon my wife, I could abandon her too." Felt no triumph. Only a dull ache of inevitability. "Where is she now?" "Yes." "I don't know," he admitted. "She wouldn't say." "And the baby?" "Yes." "She's still pregnant," he said quickly. "She wouldn't do anything like that." I exhaled slowly. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "But this still isn't my responsibility." "You don't understand," he said desperately. "I'm alone. Everyone's judging me. The town, the bank, even my own brother won't take my calls." "That's what consequences sound like," I said. "I made a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "You made a series of choices." Silence stretched between us, raw and exposed. "I just need help," he said quietly. I thought of the nights I had needed help. The silence that answered me. The empty bed. The unanswered calls. "I helped myself," I said. "That's how I survived." He swallowed hard. "So you won't even meet me?" "No," I said. "Because meeting you would only reopen a door I worked hard to close." He didn't argue. That told me everything. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank television screen. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the wreckage. Relief that it no longer belonged to me. The next day, I ran into Linda, the realtor at the grocery store. "New owners love the house," she said casually. "They're repainting already." Smiled. "Good." "They asked about the rosebush out back," she added. "Wanted to know if it would survive being moved." Pictured it. The bush I planted years ago, stubborn and resilient, blooming even when neglected. "I hope it does," I said. That evening I received an email from my lawyer. Court date scheduled. 6 weeks. I marked it on the calendar without ceremony. As the days passed, something unexpected happened. I began to imagine again. Not about reconciliation. Not about what could have been. But about what might be. A different town. A longer trip. A life not organized around someone else's unpredictability. One night, while packing away winter clothes, I found an old photograph tucked into a sweater pocket. My husband and I, years ago, standing in front of the house on the day we bought it. We looked young, certain, in love with an idea. I studied my face in the picture. She had no idea what she would survive. I folded the photo once, then again, and placed it back in the box. Not to mourn it, but to acknowledge it. That version of me had done her best. Now it was my turn. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, steady and sure, like something clearing its throat before speaking. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that the hardest part was already behind me. What lay ahead would be built, this time, on truth. Courtrooms are colder than they need to be. Not just in temperature but in spirit. They strip stories down to facts, turn years into paragraphs, love into exhibits. I sat on a wooden bench with my hands folded in my lap and reminded myself why I was there. Not to be understood. To be finished. He arrived late again. I noticed it the moment the side door opened and he slipped inside, tie crooked, eyes scanning for sympathy. He spotted me and froze, like he hadn't expected me to look steady. Grounded. Oh. He was alone. No young woman. No swollen belly to soften the picture. Just him and the consequences he had finally stopped outrunning. When our names were called, we stood. The judge was a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for theatrics. She skimmed the file, glanced up at us, then back down again. "This appears straightforward," she said. It was amazing how much truth could live in such a small sentence. My lawyer spoke first. Precise. Dates, documents, evidence of abandonment and infidelity presented without emotion. A house sale. The separate accounts. The months of absence. When it was his turn, he cleared his throat too many times. "I never meant for things to go this far," he said. I thought we'd work it out." The judge looked at him over her glasses. Intent does not override behavior. I felt something loosen in my chest. He tried again. "She didn't even tell me she was selling the house." The judge turned to me. "Did you act within your legal rights?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Were you abandoned?" she asked. "Yes." "Was there infidelity?" she continued. "Yes." She nodded once. "Then this court recognizes your right to protect yourself." He opened his mouth to argue. She raised a hand. "I'm not interested in blame sharing. I'm interested in closure." I almost smiled. The ruling was clean. Efficient. Divorce granted. Assets retained. No spousal support owed. A brief mention of future child-related obligations that were not mine. When the gavel came down, it sounded softer than I expected. But the echo lasted. Outside the courthouse, the sky was wide and bright, the kind of blue that feels intentional. My lawyer shook my hand. "You handled that well," she said. "I was ready," I replied. He approached me on the steps, hesitating like a man who had finally learned fear. "I didn't think you'd win," he said. "I didn't think of it as winning," I replied. "I thought of it as ending." He looked around, as if hoping someone might intervene. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do now." I met his eyes for the last time. "That's not my question to answer." He flinched, like the truth had finally landed where it belonged. I walked away without looking back. That afternoon, I drove out past town, toward the hills where the road thins and the noise falls away. I parked, stepped out of the car, and let the wind hit my face. I thought about the girl again. About wherever she was now. About the child who would grow up shaped by choices already made. Felt compassion. But I felt no pull. Somewhere between the courtroom and that open stretch of land, I understood something with startling clarity. Freedom is not loud. It doesn't arrive with celebration or witnesses. It arrives quietly, the moment you stop asking permission to live your own life. I got back in the car, turned the key, and drove forward. And for the first time, the road did not feel like an escape. Felt like a beginning. The strange thing about endings is how ordinary the days afterward feel. No thunder. No collapse. Just morning arriving on time. I woke up the day after the divorce expecting something to feel different in my body. Lighter maybe. Or hollow. But I felt normal. And then I realized that normal was the miracle. I made coffee and drank it on the porch, watching the sun rise over the hills. No one was waiting for me to report my plans. No one was gone and expected back. My life finally belonged to the present tense. That was when I decided to leave town. Not permanently. Not dramatically. Just enough to remind myself that the world was bigger than the diner on Main, the courthouse steps, and the house I used to clean like devotion might make it love me back. I booked a long drive west. Desert roads. Small motels. No itinerary beyond movement. On the second day, somewhere between nowhere and somewhere else, I stopped at a gas station with a faded sign and a single pump that complained when you used it. Inside, an older man behind the counter nodded at me like we were both part of the same quiet understanding. "Passing through?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Best way to be," he replied. I carried that sentence with me for miles. At night, alone in motel rooms that smelled faintly of bleach and history, I slept deeply. No dreams of waiting. No anxiety over footsteps that never came. Just rest. Somewhere along the road, I stopped thinking about him altogether. Not deliberately. Just happened. I thought instead about things I'd postponed. Skills I never learned. Places I'd never seen because they didn't fit into a shared plan. I realized how much of my life I had organized around accommodating another person's uncertainty. And how strong I'd become without meaning to. When I returned home a week later, the rental felt different. Less temporary. More mine. I bought a plant for the windowsill. Hung a piece of art I liked but knew he never would have. I ran into Mrs. Calder again. This time at the farmer's market. "Heard everything's final," she said carefully. "It is," I replied. She studied me. "You seem well." "I am," I said. That surprised her more than anger ever could. That night, as I climbed into bed, I realized something that made me laugh softly into the dark. He had left believing he would come back to the same woman, the same house, the same waiting life. Instead, he returned to discover that while he was gone, I had quietly finished becoming someone else. And I liked her. I thought I had heard the last of him. That belief settled in gently, like dust after a long drive, and for weeks nothing disturbed it. No calls. No sightings. No second-hand updates carried by curious neighbors. His absence finally felt complete, not like abandonment but like resolution. Then the letter arrived. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter, folded carefully and slipped into my mailbox like something fragile. I recognized his handwriting immediately. That surprised me more than it should have. I hadn't realized how deeply memory stores details, waiting for the smallest excuse to retrieve them. I didn't open it right away. I carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and made myself tea. The kettle whistled. The cup warmed my hands. I reminded myself that paper had no power unless I gave it some. When I finally unfolded the letter, his words came out slower than his voice ever had. He wrote about regret, about loneliness, about the silence of his apartment and the way it echoed now that there was no one left to blame but himself. He wrote about the girl, about how she had called once to say she was safe, that she had family somewhere south, that she did not want him involved. He wrote about the baby. "I may never meet my child," he said. "And I deserve that." That line stopped me. Not because it moved me to forgive, but because it was the first honest thing he had ever said without trying to make it my responsibility. At the end of the letter, he apologized. Not for leaving. Not for the affair. Not even for the humiliation. He apologized for underestimating me. "I didn't think you could survive without me," he wrote. I was wrong. I folded the letter once. Then again. Then I placed it in the drawer with the bank documents and the old photograph. Not as a wound. As evidence. That night I dreamed of the house. Not the way it was when we lived there but the way it might be now. Fresh paint. New laughter. The rosebush transplanted, still blooming. I woke with a strange sense of peace. Weeks passed. Life filled itself in. I took a short-term consulting job that paid well and asked little. I joined a small hiking group that met on Saturdays. I learned the names of birds I used to ignore. I stopped measuring my days by what I had lost and started noticing what I was gaining. One afternoon, while organizing a closet, I found a box labeled Someday. Inside were old plans, travel brochures, notes scribbled in margins, dreams postponed because timing wasn't right, money wasn't enough, or someone else wasn't ready. I sat on the floor and laughed. Someday had arrived quietly while I wasn't looking. I booked a longer trip. Not a vacation. A relocation trial. 6 months in a different state. Clean horizon. When I told my lawyer, she nodded approvingly. That's how people reinvent themselves, she said. They move before fear catches up. The night before I left, I stood on the porch one last time and looked out at the hills. Felt gratitude. Not for the pain but for the clarity it forced. He thought the surprise would be the mistress. He thought the shock would be the pregnancy. But the real surprise was this. While he was busy building a life on lies, I had quietly dismantled one built on waiting. And sold the house it lived in. Leaving town felt different this time. Not like running. Not like hiding. It felt deliberate, measured, like placing one foot in front of the other with full awareness of where the road might lead. I packed my car slowly, thoughtfully, touching each item before it went into a box. If it didn't belong to the life I was building, it stayed behind. Kept very little. That too felt like freedom. The drive out of state stretched long and open, miles of land that asked nothing from me except attention. I crossed borders without ceremony. No one asked who I used to be. No one expected explanations. I rented a small place near the edge of a quieter town, the kind of place where people mind their business because they are too busy tending their own lives. My neighbors waved politely. No one asked where my husband was. I didn't miss answering that question. The days settled into a rhythm I had never known. Morning walks, work that ended when I closed my laptop. Evenings spent reading, writing, or simply sitting with my thoughts without rushing to escape them. But healing, I learned, is not linear. Some nights, memories returned uninvited. Not the loud ones but the subtle betrayals. The times I minimized myself to keep peace. The moments I sensed distance and chose denial because it was easier than confrontation. I did not punish myself for those memories. I examined them. I learned where I had abandoned myself long before he ever did. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. "It's a girl," it read. No name. No greeting. I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew who it was from. Typed one response. "Hope she's healthy." That was all. I did not ask questions. I did not reopen doors. Compassion does not require proximity. That night, I sat on the porch of my temporary home and watched the sky turn gold, then gray. I thought about the child. About how she would grow up without knowing the full story. Only fragments filtered through regret and justification. I hoped someone would teach her honesty early. I hoped she would learn that love is not measured by presence alone, but by consistency. As for me, something settled into place. I no longer needed validation from the past to authorize my future. I had done the hardest thing already. I had chosen myself without asking permission. And though my story was not finished yet, I could feel it approaching its final shape, not with drama, but with quiet certainty. The kind that stays. I didn't expect to fall in love with my life. That sounds strange even to me. Love had always been something external, something negotiated between people, something fragile and conditional. But somewhere between unpacking the last box and learning the rhythm of a new town, I realized I was deeply, unexpectedly content. Then life tested that contentment. It came in the form of a phone call from Margaret, my lawyer. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said. "Not through gossip." I leaned against the kitchen counter, already bracing. "Hear what?" "He filed a motion," she said. "Not to contest the divorce. That's final. This is about the house proceeds. Closed my eyes. On what grounds? Hardship, she said. He's claiming financial collapse. Instability. He's asking the court to reconsider distribution. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. After everything, she confirmed. It's weak, but it's real. The old me would have panicked, would have scrambled documents, rehearsed arguments, lost sleep imagining worst-case outcomes. Instead, I felt something closer to annoyance. He's still trying to make me responsible, I said. Yes, Margaret replied. But this time the system is on your side. We prepared anyway. Evidence, bank statements, timelines showing how long he'd been gone, how deliberately I had acted, how legally everything had been done. A week before the hearing, I received another message from him. I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm just drowning. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Drowning men will grab anything nearby, even if it pulls someone else under. I had learned that lesson too well to forget it now. The hearing was brief. The judge barely looked up when my lawyer finished speaking. He denied the motion without comment. Just like that, the last thread snapped. When Margaret called to tell me, her voice was warm. That's it, she said. He has no legal leverage left. I sat down slowly, letting the truth settle. No leverage, no claim, no access. That night, I went for a long walk under unfamiliar stars. I thought about how hard I had worked to be fair, to be reasonable, to be understanding. And how none of that had protected me. What protected me was boundaries, clarity, action. I realized then that selling the house hadn't just been a financial decision, had been a declaration. I will not be the place you return to when your other choices fail. I slept better than I had in years. Time did what it always does. It moved forward without consulting anyone. I stayed longer than 6 months, then longer still. The temporary became permanent without ceremony. I made friends who knew me only as I was now. I took work that challenged me. I filled my days with things that expanded rather than diminished me. Occasionally, news filtered in from my old town. He moved away, somewhere east. Someone said he was working construction. Someone else said he rarely spoke. No one mentioned the baby again. I didn't ask. Some stories do not need updates. One afternoon, while cleaning out a drawer, I found the letter he had written months ago. I read it again, slower this time. The apology still mattered, but it no longer held weight. I tore it in half, then in quarters, then I threw it away. Not in anger, in completion. That evening, I stood in my kitchen, sunlight spilling across the floor, and thought about the woman I had been when he left. The waiting, the doubt, the shrinking. She felt distant now. Not erased but honored. She survived so I could live. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped outside, breathing in the open air. Somewhere a door closed. Somewhere else another opened. My husband had traveled for months and returned with his mistress, pregnant and certain the world would bend to make room for them. Instead, he found an empty house. Because while he was gone, I learned the most important truth of my life. If you do not leave when you are no longer valued, you will be forced to rebuild from ruins that were never yours to begin with. Chose to leave first. And that choice saved me. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment.